Hello witches, and welcome back to Activist Witch, where we discuss witchcraft and activism. My name is Raven, my pronouns are he, her, and in this video we're going to be discussing kink magic, sex magic, and how to release your shadow from bondage.
Also, before we get started, let me remind you that I've opened a Ko-fi, which is an alternative to Patreon that takes less from creators. And on there, you can do a monthly donation, a one-off donation, or even buy a tarot reading with me, Italian style. The low-income option starts at £5. And if you decide to support me there, thank you so very much.
So first things first, why am I making this video? Well, first of all, because it was voted for by you, our lovely audience. If you check out the community tab on every Monday, you'll get a poll for the video that comes out next week, so you can choose what next week's video will be, or you've already chosen that. So a lot of this video is going to be talking mostly about altered states of consciousness, kind of what they are and how they can be used and why they're really useful in magic and spiritual practices pretty much throughout the entirety of human history. Altered states of consciousness are something I find very interesting, mostly because I happen to be very good at them. Because I suffer a lot with sort of dissociative issues, I tend to use an altered state of consciousness as a defense mechanism in everyday life when it comes to any sort of stress or difficult situation. So when I started moving into spiritual practices and doing things like mind journeys and meditation, I found that I was able to use that skill I've been practicing my entire life for something that's, new and a lot more creative rather than sort of disruptive. So yeah, this is something that I've been really interested in and have been doing a lot of research in lots of different areas, and it just so happened to kind of cycle into this topic. I personally had some very powerful experiences, whether that's at the sound bath journeying that me and Isha used to go to every month or so around the new moon. I found myself slipping very easily and going off into sort of different realms and going on journeys and having very vivid and very sort of kind of creative and varied experiences that I never would have come up with by myself. Same thing as when we've tried past life regression. I found that very easy to kind of slip into the kind of spaces where you need to go to find your past selves and interact with them and view them. And even before beginning my spiritual journey and my spiritual practice, I found that there have been plenty of times in my life when I've had these very powerful, very vivid, very life-changing on a fundamental level experiences, including in experimenting with kink. I didn't really know what they were at the time. I thought that, oh, that's just what happens if you kind of do these things. And it's only through sort of the research that I've done leading up into this video that I've realized, oh, right, this thing that this book is talking about is something that I've already done. Wouldn't it be interesting to try and do it more on purpose, to try and control it, to learn how to harness that power? One of the other sides of that, though, is that because my dissociative experiences tend to come a lot from trauma, it means that I'm also very interested in psychology and in shadow work. So I was very interested when I found the book Existential Kink by Carolyn Elliott to kind of combine those two interests of my life that I've had, especially in doing shadow work. We actually found it in like a tantric sex shop in Glastonbury while we were there for the Goddess Festival. So I very much took it as kind of like, oh, this is a good sign, there's good energy, everything's leading in the right place. Having read it, it's a bit too kind of self-help book for me. A lot of it focuses on kind of, sort of career management, whereas I'm much more holistically in kind of personal growth and change and self-discovery. And I did tend to focus quite a lot more on the psychological aspect of things. More recently, on a just kind of a fun personal level, I discovered this incredible webcomic called Familiar. Link for that will be down in the description below. Yeah, it's just a very cute webcomic. It's about a woman who invokes a familiar spirit into her life to help her with magical developments and how to become a better witch. And it just so happens that the way he does that is through sexual domination. So it's a bit silly, but also very, very sweet, and it's very cute. And he turns into a cat. It's very cool. But that did introduce the idea, though, of kind of introducing kink then into magical practice, but it doesn't really give any guides on how or why or what that would be good for. Then, while kind of doing more research onto BDSM side of things, quite inspired by the Familiar webcomic, I came across a book called Radical Ecstasy by Janet Harding and Dossie Easton. And they've written like tons of books on BDSM, on how to play safely, what the rules are, very sort of like beginner guides and quite thorough guides on how to explore different sides. But they also kind of in one of their books started to randomly throw in certain spiritual aspects of things, which was very interesting to see. And then realizing that they had also this book very specifically about how to achieve these very heightened altered states of consciousness, these moments of radical ecstasy, of complete grounding, of being in the moment and connected to the spirit and fully connected to the earth. And just, yeah, sounds amazing. It sounds very similar to the kind of experiences that I've had in the past. Yeah, reading through that was very enlightening then on, I guess, how similar a lot of BDSM practices can be to a lot of things in witchcraft or spiritual practice that have been very well established. And very much became kind of the inspiration for the idea behind this book. But it was kink magic, sex magic beyond vanilla, that really kind of gave me a much better idea. In Radical Ecstasy, we're looking much more about how to kind of incorporate spiritual journeying practices into very established BDSM. Kink magic focuses much more on how to use BDSM for magical practice and how to enhance it and make your spells and workings much more powerful. And so that's mostly what we're going to be talking about in this video. So, what is kink and what does it have to do with magic? So I think first of all, we'll start off with what I think most people kind of think of when they think of kink, which is BDSM. So BDSM, if you don't know, stands for bondage and discipline, domination and submission, and sadism and masochism, with another one which can be kind of master and slave, if you want to add that in there as well. As with all things, definitions can get very blurry as you kind of move towards the edges of things outside of the stereotypical viewpoint of what these things are. But as a general rule, BDSM usually involves some kind of power exchange, and that's what we kind of want to focus on if we're going to employ this into magic. It can also, of course, involve some kind of fantasy or roleplay, which can be very useful when it comes to things like meditation or visualizations. And of course, with all things sex related, consent is completely fundamental. So anything that's going to go on in any kind of scene or ritual needs to be completely pre-negotiated so that everyone participating has complete informed consent about everything that is going to happen. Kink, on the other hand, is a little bit harder to define because the main definition you kind of get for it is any kind of unconventional sexual desire or behavior. But what is unconventional is always changing. The goalposts are moving as society develops. What we deem completely unacceptable one year can be completely acceptable 100 years later. And even beyond that, lots of things don't have to be sexual in nature whatsoever. A lot of BDSM play doesn't involve any kind of sexual activity whatsoever. There's a lot of asexual people in the kink community, I found. The relationship between BDSM and magic has kind of been there since both beginnings. I mean, lots of the tools and practices of BDSM are taken straight out of kind of ritual and ceremonial magic. And the relationship between BDSM and sort of magic and ritual and spirituality has really been there since the beginning. Like, lots of the tools of BDSM that are used have been taken straight out of ritual or spirituality or inspired by. You know, you have things like flogging as part of Catholicism. The entire idea of being subservient to a higher power or even to an organization of religion. Even things like chastity or orgasm denial, like those are things that we've taken out of wider society, usually largely quite inspired by religion or spiritual practice. In reverse, you have things like Gerald Gardner's Wiccan initiate rituals, which actually tended to involve quite a fair bit of like bondage and blindfolding and flogging and all sorts. It's a very, very kind of kinky thing going on there. Although one of the ways I personally see more parallels between BDSM and modern practice is in the enclosure of the scene or in the ritual or in the spell. As with the BDSM scene, there's a very kind of clear beginning. This is when the scene begins, and this is the roles that we'll have within the scene, and this is going to be what the end of the scene is. And the roles that we had inside the scene don't necessarily have to exist outside of that. In the same way as kind of casting a circle before a spell or calling on the quarters and creating a sacred space, a space that's dedicated towards magical or kinky acts. The consecration of different tools, making them so that they're very well looked after and are specific to a certain person or a certain deity, or never mix between the two. Like, you really don't want to get your Venus flogger mixed up with your Vesta flogger.
You don't use a flogger for Vesta, you don't say that.
I know, that's what I was saying. Where I see kink most relevant though, especially for my practice, is with the altered states of consciousness. So, what is an altered state of consciousness? Well, by definition, it's any kind of state of consciousness that is altered. In a pathological sense, any kind of dissociation is an altered state of consciousness. If you are blocking out certain parts of reality and kind of existing only in a thin slice, then yeah, that's an altered state. If you're spending time daydreaming, or even when you are dreaming, like those are altered states of consciousness. In The Psychic Witch, Matt Oren talks about the normal states of consciousness being the beta waves, and then any kind of alpha, delta, and theta waves. Accessing those is an altered state of consciousness. It can open you up to communication with spirits or with deities. It can lead you deeper inside yourself, or it can be used for things like shamanic journeying or past life regression. All of those things rely on an altered state of consciousness to be able to access them, because we need to cut out the noise of the everyday world to be able to kind of connect on that spiritual level. There are many ways to achieve an altered state of consciousness. Like I said, dissociation is one. If you've been traumatized as a child, then it can be quite easy to go, nope, don't want that, don't want to look at that, I'm going to go off into my own inner world. Other more controlled techniques would involve things like sensory deprivation. So, when we're in meditation, we close our eyes, we focus on breathing, we slow down our thoughts, we allow them to pass through. That's all trying to achieve an altered state of consciousness. You can do it through overstimulation. If you've ever seen those videos of like the faith healing, if you've ever seen those videos of those Christian churches where everyone's chanting and screaming and dancing and throwing themselves around, and they get touched by God and they start speaking in tongues, or they use faith healing, all of those things are kind of overwhelming the brain and getting the endorphins firing so it can operate on another level where it has, quite frankly, an amazing ability to do incredible things. Pain is something that's been used as a means of achieving an altered state of consciousness in lots of cultures over thousands of years. Things like ritual piercing, scarification, burning, branding, all deemed to kind of, drown out the rest of the world, get the endorphins flowing so that the brain can, operate on that special thing, and you can have absolutely incredible experiences. And then, of course, things like repetition and rhythm. When we incorporate things like drums or chanting or mantras. Just gets everything in sync onto a single purpose. That's all part of doing the same kind of thing. And that's the thing, incredibly powerful things can be done in an altered state of consciousness, even beyond things like communicating with spirits or deities or ancestors or going on your own journey. The placebo effect operates off of altered state of consciousness stuff. With that, it's much more of like an altered state of subconscious, where your subconscious mind can kind of like enact control over your body in order to cure it of its ailments. But we can do this ourselves kind of consciously as well. I found a lot of the practice to do with the spiritist hospitals in Brazil, where if someone can't be cured by medicine, they use altered states of consciousness to contact spirits to see if there's any bad spirits that are causing the problem in this person and get them to leave, and the body is able to heal itself when this. Or you can use it to go back and heal through past traumas and change your behaviors and change your beliefs for the better, hopefully. And of course, BDSM lends itself very naturally towards these kind of altered states of consciousness. First of all, just getting into a scene when someone is in top space or when someone is in subspace, like these are altered states of consciousness that are brought about by the power exchange that was negotiated before going into the scene. They can both be very euphoric and very powerful and help you to channel things that you would never be able to do in ordinary day-to-day life. And that's before you even get into any of the kind of energy raising or using physical sensations and stimulation to help build up the power for what we want to do if we're doing kink magic. That's one of the things that Janet Hardy and Dossie Easton raise in Radical Ecstasy, which is that kinksters are very good at doing things like Tantra, because they've just already put that work in and they're already quite geared and well practiced in being able to change states from who they are in their everyday lives to who they are within any kind of scene. And I suppose the point that I want to make in favor of kink magic is just its ability to take a very holistic approach to things like energy raising, because it fully combines like the body, the mind, and the spirit all together. And within the boundaries of the scene and the roles that each participant takes on, all of that combined together with the energy raised by pleasure or pain or sensation or chanting or activity, all focused on one single intention, has this fantastic potential to bring forward the desired outcome that you want from a working like that. And of course, sex magic is nothing new to the witchcraft community. There are tons of books and resources and ways to involve sex magic into different spells. And I would like to say, like, if you are a new witch and you're struggling with things like energy working or energy sensing, sex magic might be a great way to start on that, to get used to the idea of it, because sex magic raised up by physical pleasure, that's not something you can really ignore. That's not something you can kind of go, oh, that's just in my head. Like, no, you can very much feel it when it's happening. And even if that doesn't work, if you find yourself blocked, if you find it hard to go through the working and to channel things in the right way, then that can be really useful in highlighting a blockage in your chakras or in your energy. That can be something that's worked on. And once you kind of get everything else flowing, then that might open up avenues for other kinds of work too. And of course, none of this to say to start with this kind of work that you have to go to your local dungeon and be flogged in front of 20 people. Like, no, these are things that you can work on by yourself as well. In solo sex magic, you can use it to try and charge a sigil for any kind of working that you want to do, or you could dedicate your pleasure to a particular deity in exchange for their assistance on a working that you want to do, or an outcome that you want to get to. And in fact, existential kink mostly promotes this kind of solo idea. The general idea of the book is that your unconscious mind is something that's much more powerful than your conscious mind when it comes to bending reality to its will. So everything that you have kind of suppressed in your shadow will be acting out your shadow desires, the hidden desires, the things that you don't think that you want, but secretly maybe you kind of do. And so the way to get through that is to provide sexual gratitude to your shadow, to thank them for the work that they're doing to bring about your kind of kinky hidden desire, whether that's always being dumped in every relationship or it's always being fired from your job. That could be a great way to kind of move past that point so you can thank your shadow for its work and then allow it to move on to the next thing, which is what you really, really want. Tell me what you want. And something that I've noticed when looking into more traditional sex magic practices is it does tend to be a bit cis heteronormative in as far as what we're doing. So things like in Taoism, viewing semen as being the most energetically charged fluid involved. Kink really is the equalizer in that sense, because no role in kink has anything to do with established societal gender roles. Anyone can take part in those. Anyone can be the giver, anyone can be the receiver. And that's especially true when it comes to energy. A lot of the work that kink magic tries to promote is, rather than focusing on things like orgasm as the be-all and end-all, to use energy work to flow energy back and forth between the partners. Every time it goes into one, it builds up, and when it comes back, it gets even stronger. And this back and forth exchange, to do with the kind of power exchange that's going on, allows you to create something that's very, very powerful and effective when it comes to the work that you're trying to do. All that really matters in the power exchange is who's in charge of that energy and what are they going to do with it. Something you negotiate beforehand. Yeah. And one of the really cool things that seems to come up time and time again in a lot of these books is the ability, when you get good at working with this magic, is to kind of create energy appendages, body parts that you don't normally have. And yeah, apparently those can be very powerful experiences, and I may or may not have had similar experience myself with it, so definitely something I'd recommend looking into. Okay, so a bit of unverified personal gnosis here. I mean, maybe this is in books and I just haven't come across it yet, but yeah, my personal view on when it comes to any kind of deity work or communicating with spirits or any kind of journey that you go on is that brains are limited, okay? There's only a certain way that they're able to process information. Like, yes, they're able to process a lot more information than we normally do in our ordinary state of consciousness, but at the end of the day, the human mind is still limited. So when it comes to things like communicating with deities, the people who say that they've met the deity in person and, you know, had conversations or even sometimes had relations with certain entities, is that those all come in the form of what you already know, that it uses the language of your brain. So it's using your own imagination. And so the energy, the communication can be coming absolutely from somewhere else or from a different plane, but that it always kind of appear to you in a form that you're most likely to understand. It's very much like the ending of the movie Contact.
Hi, Sparks.
Dad? You're not real. None of this is real.
That's my scientist.
When I was unconscious, you downloaded my thoughts, my memories, even Pensacola.
We thought this might make things easier for you.
And so when it comes to invoking deities or entities, which, yeah, I mean, this is getting into very advanced magic, even advanced kink magic stuff. But yeah, it features quite a lot in kink magic. Is that essentially, if you want to involve a deity in some kind of kinky ritual or spell, the only way that you're kind of able to do that in these kind of scenarios, which can very much be reinforced by role-playing and fantasy, is by connecting an aspect of yourself that relates to the archetype of the entity that you want to work with. And again, you can absolutely connect with that sort of wider divine energy, but it will be in the form of, again, what you know, who you are. It'll always be a part of yourself. And so within that, then you are therefore responsible for anything that happens during any kind of invocation in this sense. You can go into a scene and violate consent while you're in there and then say, oh no, sorry, that wasn't me, that was the deity that I invoked, you must have pissed them off. Like, no, it's still using you, it's still using part of you. Anything that happens is only within the limits of your more complete holistic self. However, doing this can be very useful in bringing aspects of these entities and these deities that perhaps might be more useful in ourselves. So it can help unlock that part of ourselves, perhaps to be much more useful in sort of everyday life outside of it. It can help grow confidence, it can help grow assertiveness, it can make you more collaborative or more creative when it comes to any kind of group project. And I guess that's to say that, you know, we created the ideas that we have around deities, we created the stories as reflections of ourselves. So in that sense, we all contain those aspects, we all contain those archetypes. And just as in the pantheon and in the stories and in the myths and legends, these different archetypes are channeled for specific uses and have particular roles in the wider world, so too can we then unlock those archetypes within ourselves to play out a wider role in our own lives. And one of the things that kink magic highlights in doing this is that actually part of the BDSM scene in kind of consent and negotiation that would have to be worked out with any kind of entity that you were going to invocate or advocate into the scene is that things can work a lot better with agreement on things rather than perhaps the more commanding the powers that used to be in more traditional esoteric writings on rituals. Similarly, when working with things like succubi or incubi, as I've seen a few people talk about in different videos on WitchTube, rather than kind of getting into a much more personal one-on-one intimate relationship with these entities, that it can be more beneficial for everyone involved if they're able to feed off of the ambient energy in the room that we were talking about earlier, generating between two people and cycling it up until it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and offering that to the succubi in exchange for them helping us with whatever it is that we want to be doing, whatever the intention of the work is. All this to say, which is that there's a lot of things that you have to consider and you have to keep in mind, and you have to research and understand. Like, actually none of what we're bringing up in this video is kind of beginner magic, but maybe you're like me and this sounds very interesting to you, and this can kind of give you ideas on ways to work forward towards a future goal. And so we come to practical applications. So kink magic separates the kind of workings they do into practical magic, i.e. magic for the outer world, and metamorphic magic, i.e. magic for the inner world. I'm not sure that you can split magic into those two different categories very well. Like any kind of practical magic that you do must involve some kind of internal change on some level to allow you to be able to get towards that goal. And any kind of inner change that you do for yourself is going to have very real practical effects on the outer world. You know, one great example are things like money spells or money bowls. You know, as someone who is quite skeptical, one of the things that tied me into like, oh right, I can see a way in which this works that makes complete sense to me with something like a money spell is that when you believe that the spell that you've cast is going to bring more money into your life, it makes you more open to opportunities. It increases your luck by making you more likely to take risks, to take opportunities. You'll have a positive outcome on them because you're expecting good things to happen. And the more chances you take, the more good things will happen just on a purely numbers scale. So that's one of the ways where, yeah, doing something that's meant to affect the outer world actually has a profound effect on your internal world and allows you to enact out the version of reality that you're trying to get to. When it comes to kink magic, I prefer to think of it more between divination magic, i.e. we are looking for one of the potential outcomes of a situation we're in, and we're trying to do everything we possibly can to increase the probability of that outcome. One of the great videos I saw on this topic was by Foolish Fish, and you know, I hate when people include quantum mechanics stuff into magic, but actually the way he kind of got at that with it on how the outcomes, and then that makes sense to me. And the other side of kink magic then would be shadow work. So that's highlighting things that are going on in our unconscious mind, where essentially our subconscious is already doing that kind of divination magic. When we ruminate on negative outcomes, you know, we're observing that form of reality, we're making it more likely to come to pass. That's how we get self-fulfilling prophecies. And so shadow work is a way of getting into those internal hang-ups, understanding what the root causes them. You know, perhaps there's some kind of energy blockage that needs to be cleared out, or perhaps there's some kind of bad spirit or negative energy that's attached to you in some way, and we need to kind of cleanse ourselves of that. You know, these are all practical things that help get the unconscious mind into line with the conscious mind, so when we're setting our intentions, they're clear and they're focused and they're direct, and we're not accidentally getting the exact opposite of what we want. So one example of sort of kinky ritual magic that me and Isha talked about as a possibility to bring for this video would be, say you have a job interview and you really want to increase your chances of getting that job interview. You know, you want to make sure that on the day you're as absolutely confident and able to deliver the message as clear as you possibly can, and you're able to glamour them into seeing how amazing you really are and convince them that you are the absolute right person for the job. Maybe a little bit on the side, the other people like spill ink on themselves and they have a bad day, and so like that increases our chances. Whatever it is, this is how we want to get to. We want to get the job. So there's kind of two ways we can do then thinking in a divination magic perspective, where, okay, we want to observe this outcome because we want that one to be the collapsed waveform that we're heading towards, and we increase the probability of that outcome coming towards us. So you can enact that into a power play scene where the job interviewee actually can switch the dynamic and is this incredibly powerful and confident person and turns it around on the interviewer, gets the job by just pure willpower. And so in enacting out this scene, enacting out this role play, you are bringing that power from somewhere inside of yourself within the confines of the scene that's safe to do so, to help you aid your confidence in future when you actually go through the real job interview. Alternatively, if we were going to do a shadow work scene and all we can think about is, oh God, what if when I get there I completely humiliate myself and I not only don't get this job, but the interviewer hates me so much he calls up every single business around the city and tells me like, no, she's terrible, you can't possibly work with her and it ruins our future career chances for the rest of our lives. Well, then we want to kind of flip that around. You can enact that in a humiliation roleplay scene where within the confines of it, because we know it's fantasy, we can consent to the humiliation, we can consent to the pain and the terrible, terrible things that are happening to us, and we can get gratification from it, thereby closing off that hang up and that repetition in our minds so that we can then focus our attention away from that negative outcome towards the positive outcome that we want to get to. And of course, with any scene, like nothing is completely confined to that. You know, there's, with things like aftercare as well, that can be a great way of healing opened up wounds of when you get into this kind of stuff. Something that I personally found these kinds of workings and ideas useful for is in gender identity, and to kind of, you know, bring this into the activist witch side of things. Let's get a little bit feminist for a while. Before I transitioned, before I knew I was trans, I'd very much shoved a lot of my femininity into my shadow self. It was something that needed to be kept away. It was like my dirty secret. I couldn't look at it. I couldn't even know it was there. I was in, you know, complete denial about myself. But of course, no matter how far we try to push it away, it's always there kind of calling out, trying to get back to the surface. And so how this ended up manifesting was through kink, in taking on traditionally feminine roles in a scene. And especially focusing on the societal expectations for those gender roles, because that's where, you know, a lot of our shame comes from. And so through doing this, through doing it in a setting that is safe and contained, and there's no judgment, and there's gratification and pleasure and everything involved with it, that helped me to work through that shame and to accept my femininity and accept who I am as a trans person, and begin making those major changes to myself that affect my everyday life and my entire world. However, this is years back, so I didn't know as much as I do now. I kind of did the opposite then. So when I transitioned, I shoved my masculinity into my shadow. It was something that disgusted me. It was something that reminded me of who I didn't want to be and something I needed to get away from. And so instead of the compensatory masculinity that I was performing before, I started to perform compensatory femininity instead. Similarly, again, like those masculine aspects have started to claw back in. And the last year or so has been very kind of, the last year and a half actually, been very kind of confusing for me on a gender identity level, because I can feel these masculine aspects coming through. And so, like, once again, I went back to old techniques and explored it within a kink setting. So instead of taking on traditional feminine roles, as are the societal expectations, I went through traditional masculine roles. And again, when you do that, and suddenly when I do that and I'm suddenly feeling incredibly empowered and much stronger and more myself and more able to be me and more able to do things, to have more confidence, to have more assertiveness, to have more control. All aspects of myself that had kind of been shoved away along with the rest of the masculinity, and so I'd kind of made myself a worse person in a way. Bringing those back in and combining it all together, that's real power. Like, that gives me so many different pathways to get to what I want. I have all of these different aspects of myself now that are completely available to me, and each one has a different use, and being able to freely choose which one I'm going to put on for any given situation to get what I want. Society be damned, or whatever the expectations are for a trans woman these days. Yeah, it's been a very nice experience. Well, I hope this video was at least very interesting to you, if not necessarily useful, though I hope it was useful too. All of the resources that I used to put this video together, you can find them down in the description below. I highly recommend everything that's in there. It's all absolutely fascinating. And until the next video, I hope we can hex the patriarchy together, because there's need for it.